Hi, good afternoon. Thank you so much for joining us today. My name is Laura Bryant. I'm the Business Development Manager for Southwest Florida with Castle Group. If you're not familiar with who Castle Group is, we are a full service on-site property management company. If you have any management needs, please feel free to reach out to us. Our info will be at the end of this presentation. And I'd like to introduce Ben Z, which that's how he allowed me to not say his last name because I knew I would butcher it. So Ben, thank you for joining us from GEK Forum. If you'd like, please introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about GEK Forum. And we've got a great discussion today and you're going to teach me a lot too on electronic voting.
Great. Thank you. First of all, thank you for having me, and thank you everyone for being here. My name is Ben Zelikovitz. I go by Ben Z for short. I'm one of the founders of GEK Forum, and we're here to hopefully teach you a bunch of things about electronic voting and virtual owner meetings. Maybe before I get into it, just a quick background on myself and GEK Forum. I was a regular condo owner, and I unfortunately became involved in a community-wide dispute over some plumbing. And it's probably a story best shared over a beer. The end of that dispute was myself and my now business partners winning a proxy fight and removing and forcing the resignation of the board of directors for the condominium that I lived in. After that, I managed my condominium corporation as a director for almost 4 years. And it was during that time that the need for electronic voting became apparent. And so that is how GEK Forum came to be. And so for today, in the quickest and most efficient way I possibly can, we're going to go through a little bit about voting certificates, electronic voting, virtual meetings, show you some case studies, a very brief live demonstration of how this works, and hopefully answer some questions. So if you have any questions throughout the course of the meeting, per Shauna and Laura, there's a Q&A button down at the bottom of your screen there, or maybe at the top, depending on the device that you might be using. So off we go. Who is GEK Forum? We are an industry-leading provider of virtual meetings, electronic proxy, voting, and meeting notice distribution services. Things that are unique about us is that we are the only formally integrated Zoom ISV partner in the voting market. That allows us to do really cool things with our technology to make virtual meetings and live voting go very smoothly. We have over 1,200 clients up and down the eastern seaboard of the United States, and we are a CAI member in multiple chapters around the US. So very quickly, what does GEK Forum do? You can probably surmise a lot of this stuff, but we handle advanced electronic balloting, virtual owner meetings, inclusive of real-time voting. We do electronic meeting notice distribution, and very critical to the state of Florida, opt-in and voting certificate gathering prior to doing any electronic voting. So let's first talk about voting certificates. What are they? Why do you need them? How do they come into effect? And so a voting certificate is a document that is used to determine and designate the voting representative of a given unit. It identifies the email address to which correspondence for a meeting can be sent, the ballot to which a ballot can be sent, and to which ballots are received from. It is an obligation under Section 718 of the Florida statutes that the voting certificates are collected. Now, follow me carefully here, 14 days in advance of the meeting. You have to do this 14 days in advance in order for an owner to be compliant with the Florida statutes.
And that's HOA and condo?
That is HOA and condo. Thank you for pointing that. And so consider this. So this voting certificate that needs to be taken care of 14 days in advance, how is it done now? And so traditionally speaking, voting certificates are sent to owners via email or mail by property management well in advance of the association's owner meeting. That would require the owner to physically fill out the document and return it via email or mail by a specific date to ensure that the association's meeting process can continue as planned. This is obviously a flawed process. Nobody wants to print, sign, and scan, drop things off at the management office. If you don't even live on site, maybe you live up north or you're not on site, it's even less likely that an owner will participate and could properly fill out a voting certificate ahead of time. This process needs to be easier for owners in order to increase the potential pool of electronic voters at your community. Likewise, for notice distribution, under Florida state law, you must print and mail the notice of meeting package to all owners unless they opt into electronic delivery. So providing an easy way for owners to complete the opt-in to electronic delivery, such as our voting certificate and consent service, will give the community association upwards of 60 to 70% participation electronically. So for board members that are in attendance, you might want to have a look at, historically speaking, on your budgets, how much do you spend annually on printing and postage? And you might be surprised at how much savings can be found at stake there. So to clarify, a voting certificate can help you get the owners consenting to electronic voting, and a voting certificate can also act as a consent form for electronic meeting distribution. We'll show you a little bit about how these voting certificates work and how easy it is a little bit later in the presentation. But for now, the critical thing to note is the voting certificate is the first hurdle that you need to overcome before you start on electronic voting. When we look at new clients, we recommend that you have at a minimum of 50% of your registered owners' email addresses on file. So if you have 100 units in your condominium corporation or 1,000 households in your HOA, you want to have 50 units or 500 units covered off with email addresses. Anything less than that, and you may not be getting full value out of our service or any other electronic voting service that you might use.
So yeah, and then there was a question, how do you deal with homeowners who do not have computers and do not use one? You stick to, they can either opt in or opt out of doing electronic voting, and you would keep record of that. Or we would. Yeah.
Absolutely. And sorry to interrupt you, but yeah, the ability, the legal ability for an owner that does not have the willingness or the capability to participate electronically is very clear. They have the right to submit their paper-based ballot, their paper-based proxy, and use the old format system. So this does not leave anybody behind. Rather, it enfranchises more owners to participate. And thinking of the mass, what you're going to get is the vast majority of your owners, the easy ability to participate, while also still maintaining the paper-based methods for anyone that is uncomfortable or unwilling to participate electronically. I would further that to say that if you are a board member and you are considering electronic voting, you would want to give the voting platform at least 5 to 10 days to gather as many voting certificates as possible prior to serving notice for your meeting. This gives us enough time to remind the owners to take the appropriate steps in order to opt in to electronic voting prior to the meeting. Okay, so hopefully we are all now clear. We've covered off the first hurdle for participating in electronic voting, and that is the voting certificate. So we've gathered some electronic voting certificates from your members, and we're ready to serve the notice of meeting, and we're ready to give members the opportunity to vote and participate electronically. So let's take a closer look at what electronic voting is. And we're going to discuss two types of advanced votes, and then there's obviously the live vote. So for COAs, typically, advanced electronic voting is the way to go. An advanced electronic vote is a vote that is cast directly by an owner or a member in advance of the meeting. This is submitted using, an electronic vote is submitted using any internet-enabled device, your phone, your tablet, your laptop, desktop. It is likely also to be a secret ballot, not necessarily so, but it is likely in the COA world that advanced balloting is done via secret ballot. So that's the first method of advanced voting, most commonly used in COAs. By comparison, the next type of advanced electronic vote that we're going to talk about is the electronic proxy, which is far more commonly found on the HOA side. Proxies in and of itself are there are a lot of different flavors, I guess you could say, with respect to proxies. They may be general, they may be limited. They are completed by an owner in advance of a meeting, and this proxy gives another individual the ability to vote on your behalf at the meeting. Most commonly speaking, as an owner that is unable to attend, I will give my proxy to the board president, so this person may vote how they feel appropriate on the various matters. So the advance ballot is most common with the COA, and is a vote directly cast, you are not deferring your vote to another person. Whereas the electronic proxy, more commonly found in the HOA space, it can be general or limited, and you are giving somebody else the authority to vote on your behalf at the meeting. Those are the two ways that owners may participate electronically prior to a meeting. And then the last type of electronic vote is a real-time vote. And this is pretty self-evident. It's a vote cast during a meeting, during a defined voting period. And we find that this is most commonly used in the HOA space. And we're going to delve a lot deeper into this a little bit later on. So when sticking with the advanced voting concept, what are the benefits of it? Why might you want to consider it? A lot of it's self-evident. First of all, it all but ensures that quorum is reached at your meeting. Electronic votes count towards quorum. And through electronic voting, owners and members can effortlessly submit an electronic vote ahead of the meeting, so you no longer have your board members, your property managers, anyone else that might be working for your community. No one's knocking on doors, and the meeting is going to be successful basically every single time. We've never as long as you have over 50% of the email addresses on file, we've never seen quorum not reached. So with a higher participation rate, you're going to be able to achieve more. More participation equates to a greater likelihood of reaching your goals. We'll show you some case studies of our clients that have passed material alterations, updated documents, rule changes. With increased participation, reaching majority from large percentages of your ownership is now suddenly attainable. And we routinely have clients reach 80 to 90% voting support in favor of doing things like banning short-term rentals, for example, or updating documents, material alterations, things of that nature. So reach quorum, more participation, reduce your printing and mailing costs. Under Florida state law, you must print and mail the notice of meeting package to all owners unless they opt into electronic delivery. So giving your owners an easy way to opt into electronic delivery incrementally reduces your printing and mailing fees. On average, we observe that it is about $5 per package per unit or household for the printing and mailing associated with just the annual meeting. That doesn't include any of the other communications that you might be sending throughout the year. So as a board member, if you're mathematically inclined, you might want to figure out what the lifetime value of a consented owner to receiving documents electronically is projected out over the long period of time. On average, we see about 60 to 70% of owners consenting to electronic communication.
And what are your costs, or what are the typical costs when you go to electronic voting?
Do you mean by what is the price?
Is there a door rate, or is there, per door like we would in, a mailing?
We charge based on a tier. So we bucket the communities into tiers, and I think we have a bucket that's up to 149 units, and we have one for up to 300. And I'm more than happy to share that after the fact with anyone that is interested in seeing our pricing in a little bit more detail. But I think it's a safe assumption that whether it's GEK Forum or perhaps our competitors, that you're going to be paying a fee that is based on the size of your corporation, and that is also reflective of the type of service that you're getting.
Correct.
We are a full service platform. There's no room for error when it comes time to voting. And so the approach that we take is GEK Forum will take the appropriate data from your property manager. We upload it. We don't want any mistakes to be made, kind of white glove service, make sure that everything is done properly. It really takes the weight off of the property manager and the weight off of the pressure off of the board to ensure that things are done properly.
Wonderful.
So safe and secure, cryptographic security, IP address tracking, and other security measures, these are built into voting security. The most important thing, though, is auditability. And so GEK Forum, at a moment's notice, needs to be able to completely deconstruct what has happened at your meeting. Who voted? When? Was it in advance? Was it before? Was this vote weighted? Were you at the meeting? How long did you maintain connection to the meeting? All of the minutia and the fine details, all of these things are tracked and logged. In the unlikely event that the election is challenged, your voting provider better be able to provide you with the results that you need to make sure that you can prove that everything was done above board. And so lastly, reducing in-person attendance at owners' meetings is awesome thing to do, particularly in the post-COVID era, giving the owners the ability to participate without either attending the meeting in person or without having to interact with others is a good way to encourage participation while keeping your community safe. Some stuff that's specific to the state of Florida. We've covered off some of this, but voting members must consent to participating in electronic voting. Electronic votes are limited to the single issue identified on the electronic vote. In other words, you can't raise a new matter a new matter of business at your meeting and then apply the electronic votes to that matter. That does not work. So it can only be used towards matters that were included on the ballot. And an owner's consent to online voting is valid until the owner opts out. So it's valid in perpetuity until they opt out for both the voting and the e-document delivery. And so a couple of other kind of more details. In order for an association in Florida to use electronic voting, the voting vendor must comply with the requirements outlined in section 718.128, in that the voting platform must be able to authenticate the member's identity. The transmission of an electronic ballot must be secure and ensure the secrecy and integrity of each ballot, and the associations must still comply with the 14-day notice requirements. And there are more, but those are the top level requirements that a voting platform must live up to. On a side note, we've had a Florida-based condominium and HOA lawyer go through our service from soup to nuts to write us a legal opinion that can confirm that our solution is compliant with all of the applicable Florida statutes, 718, 720, and whatnot. So just a little note on GEK Forum. We feel that our platform gives owners the easy ability to vote prior to the meeting with no apps to download. It works on all web-enabled devices. We support secret ballots if it's required, proxy voting if required, weighted ballots, as it's very common in Florida for fractional or share-based ownership, and of course, real-time tabulations. I would say at this point that we have now hopefully given you an idea of how owners can participate prior to the meeting. On a COA, you're submitting a direct ballot or a secret ballot prior to the meeting. And typically, the voting period for COAs will end a few hours prior to the meeting, sometimes as much as a day prior to the meeting. At the end of an advanced voting period, GEK Forum turns the results of the electronic voting over to the appropriate persons or person at our client, whether it's the election committee or the property manager. From there, if it's a COA, they will take any paper-based ballots that have been submitted to them. They will take the electronic report from GEK Forum that is submitted to them. They will cross-reference them, ensure that nobody has voted twice, once in paper, once in electronic. They will combine the paper and advanced electronic votes. Off they go to the meeting where they can count and announce the results. So that is the advanced side of electronic voting. Let's now get into the electronic or the virtual meeting side of it. And so since the outbreak of the pandemic, this service has obviously increased in popularity, mostly for HOAs, to be perfectly honest. As opposed to the COA, HOAs get a lot more value out of the virtual owner meeting as a result of their election procedures. HOAs have a much more dynamic election procedure, and they vary significantly from COAs. So let's unpack that and take a deeper look. So it may seem obvious, but a virtual meeting is one that takes place online using electronic means. The critical point being that owners and members can participate as if they were there in person. And these days, there are two types of virtual meetings to consider. There is the virtual only meeting, and that is exclusively online. And the second type of virtual meeting that we're seeing these days are hybrid meetings, where there is an in-person meeting held in conjunction with a virtual meeting. So how do you know which one is right for you? Generally speaking, the answer is always yes, a virtual meeting is right for you. But what is it that you really truly need? So let's delineate between the COA and the HOA and why those needs might be a little bit different.
Hey, Ben, can you make sure you speak to co-ops as well? Or does this work the same for co-ops?
I think co-ops, I'm not a lawyer, but I do believe that co-ops work a little bit more similarly to HOAs, but please excuse me if that is not the case. The vast majority of who we work with is COA and HOA, and I will revert back to you on the co-op.
Okay.
So on the COA side, The election process is standardized. It's essentially the same for all COAs. There are no nominations from the floor. You have to nominate yourself beforehand. Therefore, there is a limited requirement for live voting during the meeting. Most people will submit an advanced electronic ballot or submit their absentee ballot in paper prior to the meeting. Therefore, the electronic meetings really consist of mostly counting previously submitted electronic votes and paper ballots. And so in this instance, a Zoom meeting or standard webinar software like what we are using today is generally sufficient. You're not polling people for votes. You're not asking anybody present virtually at the meeting to submit a vote. You're simply announcing the winner and counting the votes. So for COAs, the virtual meeting requirements are far less sophisticated than the HOA. So at a minimum for COAs, advanced voting is an absolute option to consider, and the virtual meeting is a service that you can consider on top. By comparison, the HOA sees a lot more value out of the virtual meeting service that Getform would offer, for example. Their election procedures are non-standardized by comparison. You're likely required to take nominations from the floor. You're likely required to facilitate live voting that includes proxy holder balloting and proxy balloting. And so in this way, webinar software is entirely or wholly insufficient for this purpose. So take, for example, an HOA with, let's just call a little guy, 100 units hosting a virtual meeting online. And let's just say 100 people show up to the virtual meeting. How can you tell who has voted via proxy beforehand? How can you weight the ballots of those that are present? How do you account for nominations from the floor? How do you handle registration? Suddenly, all of the registration and the logistics around voting during a virtual meeting become a lot more, I guess, daunting and more challenging to deal with. And so that's where the value of a service like Getform or other electronic voting providers becomes apparent, in that our software easily handles all of these things in an automated fashion. So very quickly, Getform's virtual owner meetings are designed to be a stress-free solution. Our team handles all the work where we upload all the data into our platform, and our customer success manager will work with the property manager or the election committee to make sure everything goes smoothly. And so, you know, what this means for the HOA is less stress, less costs, smooth virtual meetings, and all the benefits that we kind of highlighted during electronic voting. So one of the questions we're often asked is, how can we tell who is present at the meeting, as I alluded to earlier? And this is where I go back to the Zoom integration. And so we applied for and went through a lengthy process with Zoom, showed them our plans, worked with them, and we finally have finalized the integration. And so what Zoom does in conjunction with Getform is Zoom feeds us information in real time, letting us know who is there, and then Getform's system will calculate everything on the back end to ensure that we know the proper count for quorum, that we've weighted all the appropriate votes, and that any curveballs that come up at the meeting, like nominations from the floor, your voting data is set, secure, and we're able to handle everything. So why then is it that you might want to consider a virtual owner meeting? More accessibility, increased participation, reduced costs, and it adheres to social distancing measures. Some things to be mindful of if you are considering holding a virtual meeting is, the first thing is you have to be open-minded. Virtual meetings are designed to be as close as possible to an in-person meeting, but there are some things that will be different. And so it's a mindset that the board and the property management company have to come in with. You got to communicate with your owners early, help them understand the decision to go virtual, explain why, share with them instructions as to how it's going to be done, give them the opportunity to test. Conduct a dress rehearsal. This is particularly critical. We insist upon it for all of our meetings, where you would review your meeting agenda to ensure that the virtual meeting solution is able to handle all of the various procedures that you're going to be completing. Dress rehearsals also give the hosts and the speakers the opportunity to familiarize themselves with the technology. Having a good understanding of Q&A management to plan how much time you're going to allot to Q&A encourage owners to submit questions prior to the meeting, and have an idea of how you're going to handle questions during the meeting. Is there going to be a dedicated board member that is moderating Q&A? When will you going to be answering questions? Are you going to take the questions in writing? Are you going to allow for owners to have their microphones unmuted to ask the questions live? There's a lot of variance. There's no necessarily one right way or wrong way. The only thing that we would suggest is that you know what you want to do going into the meeting. Voting governance. I guess the good news is it can't get any worse than dealing with paper proxies and ballots. When you go to electronic, this should be easier for you. So have a plan. How are you going to make sure that the proxies or advanced ballots that you have received beforehand, how are you going to ensure that they are not double counted? How is that going to speak with and integrate with your live voting? And so you have to have a system that ensures that all of this is done. And then lastly, technical support and moderation. You want to have someone, if you're hosting a virtual meeting, whose sole job it is to moderate and facilitate the meeting. So that would include managing Q&A, but also managing the virtual meeting software to ensure that the appropriate speakers are enabled and whatnot. So hopefully you have a sense of now what a virtual meeting is. We've kind of covered off the voting certificate, advanced voting, and then a virtual meeting. And so now what we're going to do is a very, very brief, I promise you, a very brief walkthrough of what it's like from the owner's perspective to consent to electronic voting, to submit an advanced ballot, and to submit a live vote during a meeting. So bear with me here for 1 second.
This will be nice to see.
All right. I hope so too.
Yep.
So what's on your screen now, this is the first email that an owner would receive from GEK Forum. So I guess I should probably back up. The first step when working with GEK Forum is that the property management typically provides GEK Forum with an Excel spreadsheet that includes all of the email addresses for each of the units. GEK Forum will upload that, and we will send an email to every owner that is registered with an email address on file looking for voting certificates, and we track to make sure that only one per unit has consented to electronic voting. The email looks like this. It's completely customizable, but it has been reviewed and approved by Florida condo and HOA lawyers for suitability. So the owner, ultimately, do you consent to electronic meetings and voting? That's ultimately what we're looking for here. When the owner clicks, yes, I consent, we take them to this wonderful form. It's specific to the state of Florida. So it speaks to 718, 720, and the other applicable statutes. And what this is an electronic voting certificate and an opt-in form. And the best part is that the owner does not have to type. And so as soon as you start asking people to do anything other than click, in our experience, you kind of get diminishing returns with respect to participation. So we pre-populate the owner's name, unit number, address, and the email. And hopefully the owner will read this. If not, the only thing that's required of them is a second click on the form, and then it's done. So the voting certificate process is a grand total from your ownership group of 2 clicks, one on the email, one inside of our platform. That voting certificate is now stored inside of GEK Forum. Most importantly, it's property of the community. So you can take that electronic voting certificate and the opt-in for electronic communication, and you can apply that to all future communications going forward. So you say, hey, Castle Group, here's our electronic consent. Castle Group will now implement that and ensure that you're optimizing your communications going forward to electronic communications, thereby hopefully saving some trees and maybe saving a little bit of your budget. So step
Hey, Ben,
one. Yes.
I've got a question on this. Let me go back and find it now that I was just looking at it. Can you word a request for opting in for electronic voting and assume a yes reply if you do not get a reply? Have you heard what legal law as far as
it's an opt-in? I'm not a lawyer. I'm probably going to say that. I'm going to say that like 6 times probably today.
Yeah, I'm not a lawyer either.
If my presumption, and I've learned that I shouldn't make assumptions in a lot of occasions, but on this time I will. It's an opt-in, meaning that if you say no or nothing, you're not opting in. Right. Opt-in is it's not an implied consent. You must opt in. Okay, so voting certificate out of the way. Now we're looking at voting prior to a meeting. So this is advanced. Now this could be a proxy, but in this example, I'm showing you an advanced ballot. So this would be more so for the COAs. So this is, again, templated, completely customizable, but we show when the meeting is, a rough idea of the matters that are being voted on, and then two options for the owner: RSVP to come to the meeting, or complete your proxy or ballot. When the owner clicks register, they will land on our home screen here and it will say, yes, I'm going. And they are given the opportunity to also submit a ballot. So the first step in the ballot process is confirming your identity. You'll notice that I cannot change these details. So it is not possible for an owner to submit a ballot or a proxy on behalf of another suite. The only ability that the owner has is to submit a ballot on behalf of the unit that they own that is registered to that email address. So I'm confirming my identity. My business partner has an unhealthy Simpsons obsession, so you'll notice that throughout the course of our demonstration. This also highlights that we can facilitate write-ins, but usually on a COA ballot, you're not going to have write-ins. The nominations are locked. So we'll vote for Monty Burns and Frank Grimes. You'll notice it's ranked. On to the next, an example of perhaps you're also going to vote on fully or partially funding your reserves. The WISE board would usually want to fully fund, but who knows with your ownership group. So we'll vote for a fully fund. The opportunity to review your answers. If you're happy with it, we'll show you the electronic ballot that you're completing. And just like that, you're done. So once that ballot is completed, a copy is provided to the owner. Presuming it's a secret ballot, it goes into GEK Forum, and your board or property manager will have access to a dashboard, which for the sake of time, I will not show today, that will give them the indication that, hey, a vote has been received. If it's a secret ballot, the identity is concealed so that the property manager or anyone else that has access to our system is not able to ascertain who had submitted that ballot or vote. So your privacy is respected, absolutely. So that's the advanced voting process. And then the last thing I'll show you is how voting is done live. So when we have our owner meetings, you are on a webinar just like you are today. And what we would say is, okay, everybody, candidate speeches have concluded. It is now time to head off to your ballots. So the ballot would be sitting in the email inbox of the address that's consented to electronic voting. It'll look a little bit like this. And when the owner clicks vote now, they are taken to a landing page. And so when it is time to vote, we will turn on the voting. Give me 1 second here. This is me inside of our internal platform here. So I'll do a 2-minute voting period. So you'll notice that your screen, whether this is on your phone, your desktop, tablet, whatever, now it's pinging, it's flashing, it's saying, hey, there's a vote. So let's go vote. And we're going to submit our director vote. So we'll vote for Monty. Are we sure? Why not? And now we've submitted our ballot for Monty. Maybe there's another vote later on throughout the course of the meeting. Maybe we're going to vote on fully or partially funding the reserve fund. And so we'd say, okay, owners, back to the voting platform, please. We'll vote to fully fund. So from the owner's perspective, and hopefully you would agree, the voting certificate, advanced voting, and live voting are all pretty simple. You can access your email. If you know how to get onto a Zoom meeting, then it's a real piece of cake. So just another couple minutes, folks. I promise you, I'm just going to flip back to the PowerPoint presentation and just show you some case studies, and then we'll open it up for some Q&A. So I really appreciate your time here. Okay, so we are super proud of this one. This is the most recent Castle Group community that we worked with. It's also, to be honest, it's our largest HOA that we have ever personally worked with. So it's a 5,300 unit HOA. I think they had 36 sub-associations. They had not reached quorum in years. And so they were quite delighted with the fact that they had a very successful meeting. And they're able to facilitate the vote at the master association level. And then in meeting, we can do sub-voting. So, okay, it's time for subgroup 1 only to vote. And so all the kind of permutations that spin off of these large HOA votes with sub-associations, easily handled. So that was I would say, one of our our more larger meetings. Of course, they get a little bit smaller. I think these guys are Key Biscayne, also a Castle property. They had a 96% voting certificate, 55%, 96% of the owners submitted voting certificates, 55% voted in advance, and overall participation was 50 of the 66 units. And for these guys, it was important because they were updating some documents. So they had to hit a 50% plus one threshold to hit their goals. River Reach, 551 units, 31 proxies beforehand, 119 units in attendance at the virtual meeting, quorum achieved, happy client. And then last, these are the Mirador. They are on the bay side of South Beach. And this is actually a good view because they needed to overhaul their deck, their pool deck. And so they needed to pass, I think it was 12 material alterations in order to do that. And they did that successfully before the meeting. They were able to. So even before the action, now they're a condo, so that's everyone votes before the meeting, but they knew going into the meeting, they already had the threshold exceeded in order to pass their material alterations. Saturnia, you know what? Another Boca Raton-based Castle Group property. Very happy with. They've done advanced voting. They've also done virtual meetings with us, so they're happy. And then the last one. Oh no, that was the last one. And that's it. That's the end of my presentation. Hopefully, it was at least a little informative for you guys. And Laura, I'll hand it back over to you for any questions.
Great. Yeah, we're going to get through some. No, I love the demonstration. Thank you so much for doing that live demo. That really helped us see what owners would be looking at, how that would look to them. So let me go into some questions. I'll do the ones that were submitted live, and then I'll go into some of our ones that were submitted prior to. With opting in or opting out, how does this work with co-owners of a unit? How do they both opt in or just one owner?
Just one owner.
That's
just one owner. So it's a discussion amongst the ownership group that should decide who opts in. We usually flag when there are multiple consents from one unit. It will, I think by default, we will honor the last consent.
Yeah.
So owner A consents, then an hour later, owner B consents. Usually we give the consent to owner B, but we'll flag that and we'll usually ask property management to confirm whom it is supposed to get the ballot. It's a good question.
Great. Can the voting certificate include consent and official email address, or does it need to be separate documents?
That's a great question as well. So in fact, our consent process is a little, I would say, non-standard. The bare minimum that you need is voting consent. We lump in the electronic consent as well, just because it makes good business sense for the communities to migrate to electronic communication. So the short answer is no. There is no requirement to have the electronic document delivery consent on the same form as the voting certificate.
Great, thank you. How does this work in an annual meeting where you have a secret election ballot for election of directors and an open proxy vote for a different issue, and voters are allowed to change their proxy vote up to the beginning of the meeting?
Yeah, that's a great question. And that's the entire, well, David, that's the entire premise that we built the GEK Forum live voting platform on, is that the way that our system will work is that you can submit a secret ballot for a director election and then a proxy on another matter. But the best part is we want to maintain absolute flexibility for owners to show up and vote. So let's say, David, that you submitted your secret ballot and then you submitted your proxy prior to the meeting. And then you said, I'm going to come to this meeting. We will know that you're there. GEK Forum will know that you've already voted. And the way it works is you will still be given the chance to vote at the meeting. If you decide to cast your ballot on the director election, we will automatically revoke and replace your advanced secret ballot on the director election. If you then choose to vote on the proxy matters, call it a bylaw change, rule change, we will revoke your proxy and subtract the proxy holders weighted to account for that. So it's maximum flexibility. You vote before, you show up. If you're happy with things that you've already voted before, you simply ignore the live ballot. If you want to change anything that you've voted on previously, simply using the live ballots will automatically revoke and replace your previously submitted ballot and or proxy. Hopefully that answers your question. That's a great question. That's the whole thing with HOAs, is it's impossible to do this just using a webinar software. You have to have some sort of back engine or some software or data behind to track all these things.
Yep. One question, you may or may not know this, and I don't, so forgive me, but it is more of a legal question. Why can electronic voters change their vote up until date of vote, but paper ballots sent in cannot be returned to owner for change? I don't know that one. Sorry, guys.
I don't know the answer to that. I would only argue that from a technical perspective, it's a lot easier to handle. We timestamp and date down to the second when a vote was cast. So when another vote is cast, we know very clearly which one was cast first, which one was cast second. And that's more on the HOA side. On the COA side, I'm actually of the opinion, based on the lawyers that we've worked with, that once your ballot is cast, that's it. And I don't actually believe that on the COA side, that after you've cast your advanced ballot, I don't think you can revoke it. I think once it's in, because it goes into a black box.
Right.
And so because it's a secret ballot, it becomes logistically difficult to pull something out of the black box without compromising the identity of the people that voted in certain ways. So that's my understanding, is that on the HOA side, you might be able to revoke your electronic all the way up and including through the meeting, but on the COA side, it's a little different.
Awesome. All right, let's see. How best to ensure a quorum is go electronic voting.
Yeah, with 50%, with at least half of your owners covered off by email addresses. That's usually where when we first start working with a client, it's like the second question we ask is, do you have half of your owners' email addresses?
All right, and you and I discussed this prior to. Have you had any legal challenges? Has Get Quorum had any legal challenges with electronic voting?
Knock on wood, no, we have not. We're about 1,800 virtual owner meetings deep since early 2000, and no, we have not. I mean, we've been asked to provide details as to what happened at a meeting, who voted, when, did they establish an internet connection to the meeting, was there like we have been involved in and have provided audited details to law firms on sides of potential disputes, but nothing has ever with respect to contesting the validity of our voting solution or the validity of electronic voting. Really, elections are, at times contentious, and depending on what's happening, it's not uncommon for owners to try to contest these things, but none of the challenges that we've been associated with have ever actually progressed to a court challenge. Rather, it's really just been legal counsel inquiring as to what has happened and what transpired. And that's why I say that auditability is really key, is that we're able to kind of unpack everything that happened to say that, this owner that said that they didn't receive the package, we've got a report that says that they actually saw the email 14 times. They clicked on it 7 times, including 5 minutes before they came down to the property management office to complain, to say that they didn't get it. Stuff like that we've been able to kind of help our clients with.
Oh, that's great. And those are easy reports to pull because it's all electronic. Do members still receive paper ballots if they're voting electronically? No. Once they opt into electronic voting, correct, Ben?
I think in the package, and so it's really on a per client basis. Usually when we get an opt-in for voting and electronic delivery, we don't also have the paper-based ballot mailed to the ownership, or at least those that have consented. I mean, why would you? But there have been clients certainly that insist that everybody gets both. Really, the critical part is if you're going to be doing and accepting both paper-based and electronic voting, that you've thought this through, and that when the paper ballots come in, you've got your list of units. Here are the list of units that we've received paper ballots from. Get Forum likewise will provide you with a list of units that have have voted electronically, and then you're cross-referencing them. And the minute you see the same unit on both reports, then it becomes time to, hey, which one do we honor? Do we revoke the electronic one? Do we revoke the paper one? That is not a call that GEK Forum makes. We are a tool, an instrument at your disposal. That's really a question of bylaws and the attorneys, yes.
Yeah, have your attorney review what your requirements are. And so let me ask you this. So if an association's wanting to go to electronic voting, what is the timeline in your perfect world, right? That they've made a decision to move forward with electronic voting in their association, and they pick up the phone to call you, and they've got an annual meeting or a specific meeting they're wanting to use this platform for.
You should be in touch with us, rule of thumb, 2 months before.
2 months. All right. So 60 days. All right. And then if they're just wanting to inquire about your process, they can reach out to you at your email here. And then a couple of people asked who are the top companies here in the state of Florida. Castle Group, we work with GEK Forum. Host is another electronic ballot platform, as well as Becker Ballot. And Ben agreed those are his competitors as well. So those are our three. If you're looking for 3 quotes or 3 companies to talk to, you could definitely reach out to those. Let's see if there's any other final questions.
There's one from James.
Yes. James, yeah. How long do you keep the meeting or election results? Forever.
So we keep them on file for indefinitely. Some of our clients do request that we scrub. So if there are privacy concerns or you want it scrubbed, but we have frequently, I would say, been asked to reprovide the data from the prior year's meetings. We've done stuff like we retain the recording of your meeting, and all of the results are retained indefinitely unless we've received instruction otherwise, in which case we'll purge.
Great. That was a lot of good information. I enjoyed seeing this live and how it looks. Do we have any other questions out there? You've answered a lot of these. A lot of the ones we got ahead of time, you've already answered. Oh, let's see. I think we got another one that came in here. Oh, David, thank you.
Thanks, David.
I think that's it. Any final words from you?
No, I'm just appreciative of the opportunity from Castle Group and for all of you guys all of you that have attended. I hopefully this was informative, and hopefully we'll have a chance to work together in the future.
Yep, and I will be sending out these slides to everyone who attended, so you guys can have a copy and give you Ben's contact information should you wish to connect. And the viewing of this video will be live on Castle Group's website here in about 24 hours. So, and Ben will have a copy of this as well. So if you have further questions, feel free to reach out. I do know that our associations that have gone with electronic voting have definitely had success with obtaining quorum and getting more participation in general with their members. So it's definitely a good opportunity to get more participation and more business done. Thank you, Ben, for your time and your knowledge, and we look forward to working with you more in the future.
Thank you very much. Thank you all.
Okay. Thanks, Ben.